Alice was born into a wealthy family, but her life changed drastically when her parents went bankrupt. Unable to face the humiliation, they chose to abandon her and commit suicide. Left with nothing, Alice was taken in by Luis, a powerful and ruthless man. However, Luis's kindness was not born out of goodwill. He harbored deep resentment toward Alice's family. Years ago, Alice's parents had stolen a heart donor intended for Luis's mother to save their own child, leading to her death. Consumed by vengeance, Luis sought to make Alice suffer. Now, not only was he her guardian, but he had also become her creditor, ensuring she would remain under his control. Alice was grateful for Luis's help, but struggled to understand his inconsistent attitude toward her. Unbeknownst to her, Luis was keeping her close because he coveted her heart. For years, he had suffered from a severe heart condition and was waiting for the perfect moment to make Alice give her heart to him. However, despite his deep hatred, Luis had grown to pity Alice over time, causing him to hesitate in carrying out his plan. One day, Luis punished Alice by making her kneel in the ancestral hall for hours. Despite his cruelty, he tossed her a loaf of bread, ensuring she wouldn't starve. With her injured knees, Alice returned to school, where she was targeted by bullies due to her stunning beauty. Her best friend Cora always protected her, while their childhood friend Jason would step in whenever the bullying escalated. Cora had secretly loved Jason for years, but Jason's heart belonged only to Alice. One evening, Alice attended the school dance alone, where the bullies humiliated her, spreading rumors that she was being kept by an old man. Just as she thought Luis wouldn't come, he arrived wearing a mask and danced with her. His presence silenced her tormentors, but afterward Luis coldly rejected Alice's gratitude, warning her not to get the wrong idea. On her way home, she was accosted by thugs, but Jason arrived just in time to save her and escorted her home. Luis witnessed this scene from a distance, and his possessiveness was instantly triggered. Furious, he watched Jason walk Alice to the door. When Alice returned home, she tried on a dress Jason had gifted her. A servant soon knocked on her door, informing her that Luis was unwell and needed her to take care of him. Whenever his heart condition worsened, only Alice's embrace could soothe him. This time was no different. As Alice held him, Luis gently wiped her hair and, with a piercing gaze, asked about the man who had brought her home earlier. Alice explained that Jason was her childhood friend, recently returned from abroad. Luis noticed the dress she was wearing, a gift from Jason, and his expression darkened. Without a word, he tore the dress off her in a fit of rage, pushed her onto the bed, and kissed her fiercely. The night was filled with passion, but by morning, Alice woke up covered in kiss marks, confused about what their relationship had become. When she asked Luis, he sneered coldly, reminding her that they were merely creditor and debtor. He claimed that their night together was just another form of debt repayment, breaking her heart. Meanwhile, Jason was preparing to confess his feelings to Alice. He entrusted a ring to Cora for safekeeping, leading to a misunderstanding. Cora believed that Jason had finally noticed her devotion after all these years. But reality hit her hard when Jason bypassed her and proposed directly to Alice. Before Alice could respond, Luis intervened, rejecting Jason's proposal on her behalf. In front of everyone, he possessively claimed Alice as his own and sealed his declaration with a kiss. To humiliate Jason further, Luis tore Alice's scarf off, revealing the kiss marks on her neck, ensuring that everyone saw them. Enraged, Jason tried to fight back, but Luis's men took him away. That night, Luis's fury intensified when Alice pleaded for Jason's safety. In retaliation, he locked her in the bathroom as punishment. Later, after interrogating Jason, Luis learned that Jason hadn't slept with Alice, which relieved him. He spared Jason's life but remained ruthless. However, during Luis's absence, a jealous maid took advantage of the situation to torment Alice. By the time Luis found her, she was barely conscious. Enraged, he ordered the maid to be sold to Myanmar as punishment. Alice fell into a fevered coma. In an uncharacteristic moment of care, Luis immersed himself in ice-cold water, then climbed into Alice's bed, embracing her with his chilled body to lower her fever. By morning, her condition had stabilized, but Luis overheard her murmuring Jason's name in her delirium. Furious and heartbroken, he stormed out, leaving Alice unaware of how he had cared for her all night. Alice's birthday arrived, but she expected no celebration. However, Luis unexpectedly returned home with a cake. Her brief moment of hope was shattered when he introduced another woman, Bess, as his guest. To humiliate Alice, Bess deliberately threw the cake onto the floor. Luis sneered and ordered Alice to eat it, calling it a gift from her mistress. Swallowing her pride, Alice endured the humiliation and silently ate the cake. Later that night, she stood outside Luis's room and witnessed his intimate moments with Bess. Her heart shattered when she heard him say, "She's just a vessel for my heart." Overwhelmed with despair, Alice made a firm decision. She would return her heart to Luis, even if it meant her own death. When Luis found out about Alice's drastic choice, he refused to let her die. He ordered the doctors to save her at all costs, threatening that everyone would pay if she did not survive. Fortunately, Alice pulled through, but in her delirium, she begged Luis to let her go. Instead, Luis's obsession deepened. His sanity on the brink of collapse, he could not bear to lose control over Alice. Meanwhile, Bess discovered the ambiguous relationship between Luis and Alice. Determined not to let anyone steal Luis from her, she plotted against Alice. At the same time, Jason uncovered the truth about Alice's parents' deaths and suspected Luis's involvement. He confided in Cora, believing they could rescue Alice together. However, Cora was no longer the same girl she once was. Her years of unrequited love for Jason had turned into resentment. Knowing that opposing Luis would be dangerous, she pretended to agree with Jason, but secretly allied with Bess. Cora arranged a meeting with Alice, revealing that Luis was responsible for her parents' deaths. Alice's world crumbled. The torment she had endured, the loss of her parents, it was all tied to Luis. However, Alice didn't realize that her so-called best friend had malicious intentions. Cora drugged Alice's drink, and when she woke up, she found herself in a dangerous situation. She struggled desperately, but just as all hope seemed lost, Luis arrived in time to rescue her. He brought her back home and with a seductive gaze asked, "Do you know who I am?" Alice answered, "Luis," which pleased him. They spent the night in each other's arms. By morning, Luis's cold demeanor returned. However, Alice was no longer the same. Her heart was now filled with a new purpose, revenge. She began playing a dangerous game, pretending to be affectionate toward Luis, while secretly plotting against him. Her seductive tactics worked, driving Luis mad with desire and confusion. Just as Luis started to believe that he might let go of his hatred, Alice betrayed him. One night, Luis returned home with a bouquet, only to be met with a knife in his chest. Though he had suspected Alice's tenderness was a facade, he had still fallen for it. Instead of turning her over to the police, he simply took some medication and locked her in the basement. Alice refused to eat, forcing Luis to have her fed by force. During the struggle, she slipped into unconsciousness. Then came a shocking revelation. Alice was pregnant. Upon discovering Alice's pregnancy, Luis's obsession reached new heights. He immediately ordered the hospital staff to ensure both Alice and the child's survival at any cost. However, Bess overheard this news and was enraged. She stormed into Alice's hospital room and cruelly informed her, "Luis has decided you will keep the child, but the mother will be me." Alice was horrified. She believed Bess's words and became consumed with fear that Luis planned to take her baby away. When Luis entered the hospital room holding a prenuptial agreement, Alice's fury exploded. She screamed that she would never marry the man who had killed her father, nor would she let him or Bess take her child. Luis, taken aback, tried to explain himself, but Alice was beyond reason. She grabbed a knife and threatened her own life, forcing Luis to back off. Reluctantly, he left the room. The prenuptial agreement, which Luis had carefully drafted to secure Alice's and their child's future, was now meaningless. Alice no longer trusted him. Desperate to escape Luis's clutches, Alice turned to Jason for help. She could no longer endure living with the monster who had tormented her. Jason, still deeply in love with her, agreed to assist her. Together, they made plans for Alice to disappear. Soon after, Alice successfully went into hiding. Luis, upon realizing that Alice was gone, spiraled into madness. He searched everywhere for her but found no trace. Enraged, he decided to force her out of hiding by targeting the people she cared about. He kidnapped both Cora and Jason, knowing that Alice would return for them. As expected, Alice appeared, pleading with Luis to release her friends. But Luis, cold-hearted as ever, presented her with an impossible choice. She could save only one person. Alice was devastated. She knew that no matter whom she chose, Jason would die. In the end, she chose Cora. Luis, without hesitation, ordered Jason's execution. Alice screamed, begging him to stop, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. She was forced to watch as Jason was brutally killed before her eyes. Overcome with grief, Alice collapsed, unable to comprehend the depths of Luis's cruelty. Sometime later, Luis stood before his mother's grave, silently pleading for her forgiveness. Despite his obsession with revenge, he had married the child of his enemy. At the memorial service, Alice appeared, and Cora glared at her with pure hatred. If Luis hadn't been present, Cora would have torn Alice apart. She swore that the next time they met, they would be sworn enemies. Meanwhile, Bess, upon learning that Louise had married Alice, became consumed with jealousy. She deliberately set fire to her own house, injuring herself in the process so that she could stay in Louise's home. Alice, still recovering from the trauma of Jason's death, awoke to the sight of Louise gently tending to Bess's wounds. The sight shattered her. She remembered how disgusted Louise had once been when touching her own blood. Yet here he was, caring for Bess with such tenderness. Unable to contain her rage, Alice lashed out, only to be swiftly punished by Louise. For the sake of her unborn child, she endured Bess's taunts and Louise's unpredictable mood swings. Bess, determined to completely destroy Alice, ordered her people to dig up Alice's parents' ashes. Desperate to reclaim her family's remains, Alice rushed to Louise's ancestral hall. There she found Bess standing over the ashes with a cruel smile. Before Alice could react, Bess arrogantly threw the urn onto the floor, scattering the ashes everywhere. Furious, Alice tried to fight back, but Bess shoved her to the ground. In that moment, Alice wanted nothing more than to kill her. However, Bess was a master manipulator. As soon as Louise arrived, she quickly pretended to be frightened and accused Alice of trying to hold a memorial for her parents in Louise's ancestral hall. Louise's rage exploded. He grabbed Alice by the throat, his voice cold and full of fury. "Do you know what your parents did? They killed my mother." With that, he forced Alice to kneel in the ancestral hall as punishment. Later, a kind-hearted maid secretly revealed the truth to Alice. The heart that Alice had been living with was originally chosen by Louise's mother for herself. However, Alice's domineering parents had forcibly taken it to save Alice's life. Unlike her vengeful son, Louise's mother had chosen forgiveness and never held a grudge, but Louise had never let go of his hatred. He had relentlessly targeted Alice's family business, believing he was enacting justice. However, Alice's bankruptcy had not been caused by Louise at all. Instead, her parents' downfall had resulted from their own greed. They had produced low-quality food, which led to multiple deaths. Their business collapsed due to their own actions, not because of Louise. Upon hearing the truth, Alice was overwhelmed with guilt. She had spent so many years hating Louise, believing him to be the sole cause of her suffering. But now, she realized her parents had been far from innocent. Just then, Bess, in a fit of rage, grabbed a frozen fish and smashed it into the maid's head, killing her instantly. The immense shock caused Alice to faint. Seizing the opportunity, Bess handed Alice over to Cora, leaving her fate in her hands. As Alice begged for Cora's forgiveness, she suddenly felt sharp movements in her belly. The baby was coming. Cora, moved by their old friendship, reluctantly helped Alice give birth. Despite her bitterness, she couldn't let Alice die. Once the baby was born, Cora secretly hid the child, knowing that Louise would stop at nothing to take him away. But before Alice could recover, Bess appeared at the abandoned building where she was being kept. The wicked woman had decided to sell Alice overseas. Alice was transported to an underground hospital, where she was drained of much of her blood, but she refused to give in. When the staff let their guard down, she fought back and attempted to escape. However, her efforts failed, and she was met with even harsher retaliation. Meanwhile, Louise, growing desperate, found Cora and threatened her to reveal Alice's whereabouts. Cora, finally letting go of her past hostility, confessed the truth. Alice had been sold overseas by Bess. She also revealed that Bess was responsible for the maid's death. Louise wasted no time. He tracked down Alice's location and discovered that she had been sold to a cruel couple who had once bullied her. When they realized who she was, they panicked and immediately called Louise. Finally, Louise managed to rescue Alice and bring her home. After receiving medical treatment, Alice slowly regained her ability to speak. Once she had fully recovered, Louise took her to an abandoned building and handed her the power to judge Bess. Alice, filled with rage, decided to make Bess experience every bit of pain and suffering that she herself had endured. As time passed, Alice and Louise began to heal the wounds of their past. They chose to leave their grievances behind and move forward. In a solemn moment, Louise proposed to Alice, offering her a special gift. Jason was still alive. In the end, Jason and Cora also found happiness together. And for Alice and Louise, their twisted love story finally reached a point of redemption.